Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. A great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I was actually kind of surprised where we started at in the show. I thought, we still kind of get it, but it's not the way I thought we were. I thought we'd kind of build up to her becoming, we get introduced to her life, then see her as she eventually becomes She-Hulk, and then kind of build from there. But it's no, she's been a Hulk for a couple months at this point in time. She just hasn't hulked out. She's been able to keep it under control, and so we just introduced her lawyer life first, and it's okay, let me tell you this story. So I love that basically we find out about Bruce's circumstances. The last time we saw him was in Shang-Chi, so I'm assuming this is post Shang-Chi, because it's been a while since I've seen Shang-Chi, so if I remember correctly, that was post the blip, wasn't it? I believe it was. And so when we saw him, Bruce was in his human form. Well, now he's back to his human form. It's because he has a very prototype device that allows him, because he's right, they say I won't be able to, my arm will ever heal. So I guess he's turning back into his human self, hoping that maybe that'll kind of help, maybe focus everything. He didn't really go into it too much, but I love that Jennifer's I just asked what you've been up to. It's yeah, I gave you an answer. And then I love this running conspiracy theory that she's thinking that Steve Rogers didn't really have a girl. It's he was a virgin. I love that's the conspiracy theory. Even in the end, the outro of the title sequence at the end, she has a little diagram kind of running her conspiracy theory. I love that these Disney Plus shows are just throwing out their Steve Rogers conspiracy theories, because was it Falcon and the Winter Soldier? The running theory is that Steve Rogers is on the moon. If I remember correctly, I want to say it was that. Or was it Hawkeye that talked about that? I thought it might have been Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but might have even been Hawkeye. I think it was Falcon and the Winter Soldier that talked about the conspiracy theory that Steve Rogers is alive, but he's on the moon. Because they have been very cagey about that detail, whether or not I'm assuming they haven't really talked about whether or not he's actually dead or not. And the last time we saw him was in Endgame as an old man, but he could still be alive after all this time. It's been, so we don't know. We never really got an answer to it, not unless he died sometime after he passed on the shield to Sam. But either way, at first I was oh, the accident is called wait, a ship. I'm wait, what? Because the spaceship came out of nowhere. I was what the hell was that? Apparently, the way Bruce explains it, it's it was some Sakaar messenger. I guess they were tracking Bruce, and it just kind of caused an accident. It's well, you kind of didn't do anything to help that situation. So, and then turns out from the accident, Bruce ended up bleeding into Jennifer's open wound, and that's how she gets infected. But it was almost like a werewolf transformation where she kind of blacked out. Then it's nighttime. She goes to the bar. And I love that where she was in the bathroom. They're oh my God, what did they, you don't need him, her, or them. It's oh, that was really sweet. I'm yeah, look at this. That's actually really tight. Legitimately, I'm sure people will say something about it. But I'm regardless, I don't know if dudes would even do that. I was that's actually really sweet. They're you know what? No, girl, we're going to hook you. She's I don't need makeup. It's yeah, you do. Oh, they also gave her shoes. She's I just need a phone to call my cousin. And they're oh yeah, here. I'm dude, that's legit. That's beautiful. So many people came together in that moment like that. It's girl, don't worry. We got you. Whoever did this to you, you don't need them. We got your back. I'm that camaraderie. It's yeah, and it almost feels I guess in my head I thought because I feel there's a communal element of a girl's bathroom. She almost hulks out on some dudes who are being very, very pushy. So Bruce brings her to Mexico, which that's not where he was during the Incredible Hulks and stuff like that. I think he was in South America specifically, when he was at least when they eventually caught up to him. I don't remember where he was when Natasha ran into him. But Jennifer getting, told everything about what ended up happening. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing too, the way he kind of explains him and Jennifer's circumstances. He's yeah, you absorbed a lethal dose of gamma radiation. She's lethal dose? Am I going to die? He was no, there's more to it. She's that is not the sentence to pose on Bruce. He's I'm sorry. But the fact is that he's basically her DNA, just her genetics, they can what was it, synchronize or their body handles gamma radiation differently than most people, and hers is very specific that he was able to heal his own arm with it. So then part of me is like, okay, so that implying like there's some like, it's just interesting timing too, because the last series obviously was Miss Marvel, where we got into the talks about Kamala's DNA. So wondering like, is that kind of implying like there's something very special about Jennifer's DNA that made it like her, that's why her circumstances as a Hulk are very different than Bruce's, because like her body processed the gamma radiation in a very different way. And like Bruce is trying to get her to like control her powers, because it's like, right, this is like, for him it was like a 15-year journey that he's still kind of on, and he only got answers to about over that 5-year time gap of the blip is when he ended up like kind of getting some answers to it, but it's still something he struggles with. And he can't make her a prototype because it's the only one of its kind, plus it was synchronized to his DNA and her circumstances are different, so he sets up everything to kind of draw out her Hulk, which she does, but it also seems like she's in complete and utter control of herself, unlike him. And it's like, whoa. It's like, wait, you don't have another alter ego in there? It's like, no. It's like, wait, you're just yourself? And for him, he's like, well, I guess we could just ignore this part of the binder, because he's like, yeah, I planned all this. I, just have been taking notes on my progress over the years, my evolutions, and, I didn't mean it to be like kind of an orientation, like guidebook, but I mean, inadvertently ended up becoming one now that Jennifer's going through all this too. And first and foremost, I love the whole conversation about, it's like, yeah, like, how do I turn back to normal? And he's like, well, typically I end up getting knocked unconscious by, like, something, a robot. I'm assuming that's in reference to, the Hulkbuster in Age of Ultron. And he was also like, yeah, Natasha one time, like, sung me this lullaby. And I love this, like, now, how did that work again? He's like, actually, I'm not really sure on that, the details on that. Which I love that. I love that so much that it's just kind of like this meta thing of like, how did that work? Don't worry about it, because we haven't really used that since Age of Ultron. I thought that was kind of neat. I mean, truth be told is we did use it in Ragnarok, because Thor tried to use it on Hulk during Ragnarok. But he's like, yeah, I did get kind of stuck as Hulk for like 2 years. She's like, 2 years? She's like, I said it happened one time, And he's trying to get her to go through all like that, breathing exercise and stuff, and which I thought was interesting. She's like, oh, like, I never took you for the spiritual type. He's like, no, it's not spiritual, it's scientific, which I think that's kind of an interesting little thing about him being like, no, I'm not going at this from like the spiritual side of things. I'm coming at it from like a very scientific point of view, and I think that kind of shows that aspect of like who he is, like just a little personality trait, like, yeah, or just aspects about him. Like, I don't get too caught up in the spirituality of it. I just care about like the scientific like proof that like it does work. And she's like, oh yeah, like I was just thinking it was going to help like give me a tight butt up top. He's like, gross, I'm your cousin, He did talk about some really neat stuff, that this place was a place that him and Tony like built. Like, it was where, once again, this is the place he ended up working on the whole making him the Smart Hulk thing, whole situation. Where she's like, that's not my name. That's the problem with the whole superhero thing. You kind of don't get to name yourself. She's like, yeah, but you kind of co-sign it by like continuing it. So it means you're kind of okay with the whole Smart Hulk thing. But I do also love that Bruce does have some insecurity when it comes to all this, which makes sense. For Jennifer, it's the easiest thing in the world, because she's so like, oh, like everything's fine. Like, I'm got way more control over this. I can I'm learning like to transform and turn back on my own. And the problem is that Bruce doesn't have that fortitude. Like, for him, it's like, and I thought that was kind of interesting, like how they really, like, I think they handled that, where it's like when they eventually had their argument later on, where she basically threw everything in his face, but it's from his perspective, it's like, I'm trying to help you, you're a superhero, like, we're the only two of our kind on this planet. The fact is, we have to use our powers for good, because eventually when people start looking at you like a monster, there's no going back, there's no flipping that switch the moment people start seeing you as something dangerous, and it's like he's lived his entire life like that. But that's also for Jennifer why she doesn't want this. She's like, I don't want to become a superhero. You end up having to ostracize people and you just end up alone. He's like, what are you talking about? It's like, I mean, look at you. You were like on the run. You had no friends, no family. Like, you kind of had to stay locked up in a lab. Like, you had to deal with all of this. It's like the superheroism of it all isn't even worth it if like this is the like end result of like it cost you so much, because she has a life that she's built for herself that I want to get back to. But for Bruce, I think it's like, right, he's had to deal with this so long, he's had to battle himself, and that's also what annoys him so much about Jennifer, is like, oh, it comes so natural to her, she doesn't have to go through the struggle. So of course it's going to mess with his head a little bit. Yeah, he's going to go a little jealous. The fact is that multiple times he had to show off because she threw the rock further than him, so he had to take the rock and throw it even further. He's like, I had to show you. She's like, oh yeah, you showed me. And then he's like, doing kind of the balancing thing. She's acting like it's the easiest thing in the world. He pushes off the cliff. She's like, dick move. He's like, yeah, sorry. He can't hide his frustrations, which once again, understandable, like that it would bother him how easy it is for her. That she doesn't have to go through, like, all the dark times I've had to go through. I mean, he's talked about it, like, right, we know he hasn't even been able to kill himself, because he ended up, anytime he does, he just spits the bullet out. So, like, he can't even end his own existence. So, of course, it's like, and I think some people probably like feel like, yeah, the Hulk, especially in Endgame, you got used more jokingly and stuff like that, and haven't really leaned into the darker aspects of the Hulk. And I think this was him kind of leaning into that to some extent in his show, kind of leaning into like what he's dealing with and what that is in contrast to Jennifer. Like, but also it's just because that's not what she wants for herself. Like, he is the walking example of what not to be and the life you don't want to lead. But for him, it's like he wants to make sure Jennifer's, got better control. It's like, we need to get your anger under control. But she's like, I do that on a daily basis, when basically I have to, like, just like everyday existence for her, where it's just like, yeah, on a daily basis. Because she doesn't have the platitudes to, like fly off the handle and it won't be an issue. It's like, if I do, there could easily be consequences. I could be considered difficult. And that is the sad thing, like, you do hear that does, happen, where it's like, yeah, she's so difficult to work with. It's like, yeah, people can have an off day, but you'll probably, that label gotta get stuck with you longer. She's also like more likely to get murdered too. So I have to worry about stuff like on a bigger basis than you. Like I've had to deal with stuff on a longer and bigger basis, so I've had to deal with my anger on more occasions than you've ever had to, Bruce. And she's starting to transform. He's like, see, she's like, no, I'm making a point. I can control this. I can turn it on and off whenever I want to. I wasn't expecting the full-blown brawl that kind of ensued. That was incredible. Ended up smashing up his bar, and he ended up having to, they worked together to repair it, which is also sweet, because apparently, like, Tony would come by from time to time, and he's like, yeah, he spent the entire time, and we'd get drunk, and he'd just spend the entire time complaining about Steve, which is so funny to think about. I'm curious about the fourth wall breaking thing, like whether they'll really go into it or not. I'm really curious about how that 100% operates, because she made sure to do the fourth wall breaking thing at the beginning. She made sure her friend Nikki wasn't in the office at the time. She's like, oh, I got to do something. And then she explains everything that's going down so far, right? The fact is that, like, when Bruce hears her do it, she kind of, like, turns and almost looks, because that was the first time she broke the fourth wall at this point in time, and she was almost like, huh, did I? I think it's that situation. Like, I'm curious about it, because obviously, like, the comparison is, because obviously, like, you can't help but think of Fleabag because of people, I mean, even the show creators and stuff like that were saying, like, right, that's kind of an influence for this. You kind of get that in Fleabag, but only with the hot priest. So I'm wondering, is it a situation of like, right, she hasn't really gotten it down pat, the whole fourth wall breaking thing. So for her, when she does it, she kind of goes like, wait, did I just do that? And because Bruce heard her. So maybe she hasn't quite mastered it at that point in time. Or maybe it's a thing of like, I need to be alone when I'm doing the fourth wall breaking thing, or people will hear me and realize like, oh, how weird I am. So like, maybe we'll see later on she'll do it and they're like, what are you doing? She's like, what? Nothing. Like, so like she probably... Because, like, the instant we've seen, like I said, she made sure to do it after Nikki left the room. So that's why I feel like that is probably how that's going to be implemented, how they're going to use that going forward. Like, if you don't do it while you're alone, you can do it at any time. But if you do it around other people, people are like, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, you're going to look crazy. So, yeah. And obviously, she, kind of finally goes back to her normal life, but obviously she's like, yeah, I proved Bruce wrong. I haven't had a Hulk incident in like months or whatever. I am curious about some of that stuff at the ending. What we got is that stuff like some of that is that stuff we could see in the future, or some because there's like the whole thing like was it shopping. Bulk shopping. Jeez, I couldn't say that because it's like Hulk and her, and he's showing her off the spandex. I'm assuming that's something that's going to happen like in the future, but we probably won't ever get it. It's probably stuff like that. But I think that's really neat. That whole end sequence though, like just the nature of. In the grand scheme of things, just like that outro, I hope we do continue like that. I like that stylized outro. I think all the shows have had a really nice, very unique stylized ones. Like the whole like drawing aspect to it. I was like, oh, that's I really love that, and it feels very befitting of She-Hulk. But also just the ending itself, where she's in court. She's like, I'm doing my thing. I don't have to worry about the Hulk thing, because like her family knows and her friend Nikki knows, and they're the only ones who kind of really need to know. Other than that, no one else knows. So, but then she gets attacked by Jamila Jamil's character. Was it is it Tatiana? Not Tatiana. Titania or something like that. It's something of that nature. I know I'm slipping up a little bit because in my head I was always thinking like, oh, that's interesting, considering like obviously the actress who plays Jennifer is Tatiana Maslany, which I didn't even talk about that. Like, come on. If you don't know anything about me, I'm a massive Orphan Black fan, so I've loved Tatiana Maslany for a very, very long time, and I'm glad to see her in this role, because it kind of throws me for a loop to some extent, because like the things I've seen her in, because I think she had a very distinct accent in Perry Mason, I believe. I am kind of bummed she won't be in season 2 of Perry Mason, just because she was doing this, so conflicting schedules. Because also, like, she was doing a British accent as Sarah. Granted, she was doing so many different accents as different people over the course of that show. Oh, God. She's really... I think she's I think she's one of those actors that's like a chameleon that really, like, can really slide into any role. At least I feel like that. Either way, because it just came out of nowhere was kind of my whole point. Like Jamila Jamil's character just like busting. I'm like, okay, no introduction or anything. You're just there. She didn't even come from you. I'm like, so why is she here? I'm assuming it has to have something to do with that particular court case, but it's just like, no. Jennifer hulks out. She's like, oh, I love the suit. And Nikki's like, hey, leave your shoes. She's like, right. Takes care of it instantly, reverts to normal, puts on her shoes, and like, right, I'm ready to make my closing argument. And then we got that mid-credit scene, which I love so much. Her and Bruce are drinking, and she's just like, oh my God, Steve Rogers, after everything he's done, he did not deserve to die a virgin. I mean, that ass, he didn't deserve to die a virgin. It's like, Steve didn't die a virgin. Didn't say die. He said like Steve wasn't a virgin. Fact is, he lost his virginity in 1943 on a USO tour. And she's like, I knew it. He's like, wait, you're not drunk? She's like, Steve Rogers fucks. I'm like, yeah. Because I figured, I'm like, well, there's a good chunk of Steve's life we never saw. So, but it's like, oh, so I wonder, was that? Well, I mean, they were saying like the USO tour. So I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't remember 100% the timetable, but I'm like, was that had to be like, that was, since you were talking about the USO tour, it had to be like after he became like, it's like, oh, interesting. Because I get it, because the argument is like, well, when would he have had time? Like, would anyone have dated him before he became, well, Super Soldier Steve Rogers? And him and Peggy never had an opportunity to like to get together, you know? So because of that, but I mean, eventually they did get together, so, but I just thought that, once again, I love the little conspiracy theories about Steve and stuff like that, so. But circling back to something I brought up earlier, the whole Sakaar ship thing, he was saying, Bruce was like, oh yeah, that's like a message or something. He's like, I might have to like look into that and find out what that's about. I'm like, okay, maybe that's set up for something, because the last time we saw Bruce, it was something about it was him and Carol with Shang-Chi and Wong, which we know Wong is going to pop up in this. So the question then becomes like, okay, so that Sakaar thing about, well, there's a lot in between, like, because, well, we know like the Marvels is obviously coming like at some point in time, but that's going to be after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, so maybe there's going to be some correlation. Maybe this is teeing up Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 to some extent, or maybe even the Marvels, which all that might tie into the 10 rings and the Negaband that Kamala has. I mean, it might even be in correlation to the fact is Kamala is wherever the hell Carol was, and Carol's here on Earth, and so maybe that Sakaar ship has something to do with that. A lot of questions and a lot of possibilities of what that could be and what that can mean. We probably won't get answers to that because I'm like, yeah, that's set up for Bruce's story, whatever we see him next and whatever that's in conjunction with. This is about Jennifer's story, you know. I'm very excited to see where this goes. She-Hulk is a character I'm not that well versed in. I knew a little here and there going into the show, but other than that, I didn't really know too much. Obviously, I know, like, wasn't it like, it had to, obviously they changed the origin a little bit because, like, it's just like, oh, he bled into, like, an open wound of hers, but I think from the comic, she needed a blood transfusion, and that's how it happens in the comics. They kind of simplified it a lot more in this particular case, but, I am, either way, just kind of putting on that side, getting to know Jennifer, getting to know She-Hulk, kind of her life, and just everything that she has to deal with. I'm very, very excited to see where the show ends up taking it. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.